Morning guys, Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. Out here today doing some projects with Jeremy Janey. And we've got a deer hide that we got donated to the school here. Probably still got a lot of tallow left on it. I had a question when I processed the last deer hide. I talked about it on Facebook, and somebody asked me, how do you salt down a deer hide to preserve it for later tanning? So what we're going to do today is we're going to take this deer hide out, see how much meat's left on it, scrape it, get the tallow off of it, and harvest that for later use. And then we're going to salt this hide down, so stay with us. Okay, so we've got this deer hide here that we were donated, and you know, I'm looking over this deer hide to see what kind of quality of hide it's going to be and decide what I want to use it for. I could scrape this thing off and stretch it out on a rack, and I could make a raw hide out of it and leave the hair on. If I left the hair on, then that means that raw hide is going to be usable for things like knife sheaths, anything that's going to be hard. You know, I could make an envelope pouch out of it, something like that. If I soak this thing in ashes for a while and made the hair slip, or wet scrape the hide to get the hair off, which is a little bit too late to do that now because the hide's probably 24 hours old. But if I soak it in ashes or lye water, it will make the hair slip or make the hair fall out. Then I could stretch it on a rack, scrape it really good, let it sun dry and turn to rawhide. Then I have a lot of other options to use it for: containers, cordage, and things of that nature. Or we could brain tan this hide. A hide this size is a good candidate for brain tanning. I'm not a big fan of tanning small game hides or using small game hides that waste a lot of time and energy for very little return, especially in a short-term self-reliance situation. So what we're showing now is what you can do with big game in a homesteading or long-term self-reliance situation, or if you came across a deer carcass maybe in the woods, which is a possibility at any given time. There's some things you can harvest off of that if it's still there. One of those things is this tallow right here. You can see these big hunks of white fat right here, and those are what we used in our other videos to make our candles with. We used them to make a grease lamp with. We used them also to make soap with. And what I want to do is just scrape down and get that off of there without cutting the hide if I'm going to try to save the hide. If I'm not too worried about the hide, then I probably wouldn't worry about what I was cutting. All right? But in this case, I want to kind of save the hide right now until I decide what I'm going to do with it. And I think I'm just going to salt it down and use it for a primitives class this weekend. So I'd like to get this tallow pretty much off of here without splitting the hide. Now if I came across something like this in the woods, you know, on a cold day like today where this thing's not going to stink too bad, there's a lot of insulative value in this hide. Even to turn this thing just like it is right now and sleep on it for the night to save me from conduction problems or things like that from the ground is a viable option. What you have to remember is that a raw hide like this that's got blood and meat on it is going to attract predators if they're in your area. So you have to think about all those things. There's always pros and cons to everything that you do. Looks like we got some tailbone still in here. Right there's the tailbone. We'll just go ahead and cut that right away from the tailbone now. Just leave that tailbone in there for the time being. We'll cut it out with an axe here in a little bit. I'm not going to chop that tailbone out with my knife if I've got an axe. That's crazy to chop bone with a knife for no reason if you've got an axe handy to do it with. I want to save as much of that fat as I can. There's a good heavy chunk right there. And there's a good heavy chunk right there. Now I'm looking around this hide and I'm seeing a few more spots that have fat on them. There's one right here that's pretty heavy duty. And I could probably spread this out, cut into this a little bit with my knife, and if I'm careful, I can separate this from the hide if I've got a good sharp knife. Again, that's the reason you're not going to be trying to bone an animal or cut bone with your knife, because you want it good and sharp for things like this. If I didn't have a really sharp knife or a really sharp axe to do this with, I'd be cutting holes in a hide that I may want to use for something else. And I don't want to do that. There's another nice chunk of tallow right there. And when you render this down, you're going to separate the meat from the tallow, which is the whole purpose behind it. Looks like there's another chunk right here we probably don't want to waste. So I'll try to stretch this hide out a little bit. See if I can get underneath it with my knife. It's not a very thick chunk. Hardly worth the effort, actually. Some of this is meat that's still left on here. We're going to have to get this meat off of here before we salt this hide down. We'll want to get all the meat that's left on here off. But we want to salvage as much tallow as we can before we do that. You see that meat attached to that tallow? I'm not even going to waste my time with that. I'll just cut that piece off and throw it away. Now this tallow here is what we're going to save. So now what we want to do, before we can salt this hide down, we really want to get all the meat off of it that's on here, because we don't want to have to deal with that later. So I'm just looking for these big chunks like this right here, and I'm going to cut those off. Now there's some edible meat left on this deer for sure, but again, it's probably over 25 or over 24 hours old, so I'm not going to mess with it. But that's a chunk of meat that's really actually would have been edible meat right there. Now this stuff is all great bait for traps. If you're not going to use the meat or the fat or any part of this that you're going to throw away, is bait for more traps. Just remember that when you use meat type baits for traps and things like that, you're probably going to get a scavenger in your trap. You're not going to go out and trap squirrels with deer meat. You're going to get possums, coon, skunks, things like that. So just remember that when you bait your traps. So we'll have to get all this meat off of here. It'll take a few minutes to do that. Once we get it all off, then we'll be able to salt this hide down, so stay with us. Okay, so now that we got the majority of the meat scraped off this hide, or 95% of it, most of it, if we were going to do something with this hide, like try to make rawhide out of it, we'd stretch it on a rack. If we were going to try to brain tan it, it would depend on whether we were going to try to do a hair on or hair off, what we would do next. But in this case, we're going to save it for our primitive skills class this weekend, so we're just going to salt this hide down to save it for later use. The easy way to do that is we wash the hide off now a little bit to get some of the dirt and debris off of it. We've got the gut side up. We're going to get 2 containers, full containers of salt, and we're going to rub it into the hide, and we're going to roll it up. Jeremy, I'll take one of these. I'll take one of them and we'll just go to town here. So we just got Morton iodized salt here right from the grocery store, and that's what we're going to use here. And we're just going to pour it on ample, making sure we get it in all the little crevices. And what I like to do is I like to pour it on pretty thick and then kind of rub it in with my hands after the fact, just to make sure I get a good coverage. And like I said, I pour the whole thing on there. And I use 2 of them per deer hide. And I just smear it in real good, make sure I get the whole hide covered with salt. You got any left in there? No. Oh, let me grab a little bit of this, okay. I got one spot right here I want to trim. It's got a little bit of fat left on it right here. Get that off of there. Same thing over here. Make sure you're rubbing in all the edges real good. And this will preserve the hide until you get ready to do something else with it. And once you get that rubbed in real good, all you're going to do is basically roll it up with the hair side out and the gut side in, just like this. What I like to do is kind of blanket fold it, just like that. Now what we'll do with this is we're going to store this in a cool place. You could freeze this if you wanted to. What we're going to do is we're going to put it in a garbage bag, and we're just going to hang it out in a nice cool place until class starts day after tomorrow. Grab that garbage bag, Jeremy.
I'm Jeremy Janey with Pathfinder School, and this is Dave Canterbury, and we appreciate your views and your support, and we'll catch you next time.
See you, guys.